I'd like to focus first on your speech to staff, which obviously drew a lot of attention. As the new Director General, you stated that renewing your commitment to impartiality was your number one objective. In what ways do you think the BBC has been failing in terms of being impartial, and why do you think that is, and what are you going to do about it?
Well, as I set out in the speech, my key concerns were not historical issues in terms of left or right politics, frankly. And you know, the pursuit of impartiality is always going to be an imperfect art. And I think you can look back and say there were things that we've often omitted, things we didn't get spot on. But my speech was not focused on that. It was actually focused on audiences and audience value. And the research is pretty clear, actually. We've had a number of recent surveys suggesting that actually on the left-right axis, you know, it's pretty balanced. Marginally people think we're slightly more left-wing. Most people think we're pretty much in the middle. And actually when it comes to a trusted news source, we are well ahead of anyone else. In fact, our trust ratings through COVID have gone up. So that wasn't the issue. But I did say there were two things that I was concerned about. And I do believe that if the BBC isn't a trusted source, then that, I use the word bedrock, then you can't build on other things. And I think, in fact, in this world, it's going to become more rather than less valuable as a trusted source. And there were two threats to impartiality, Chair, that I noted. The first was that in this age, I think that the pursuit of impartiality can often be seen as almost unachievable with so much noise in social media. This group will be very aware of that. And there was some research actually among under 35s that said most of them find it quite hard to get the notion of impartiality at all. And they ascribe everyone who asks any question of any politician or anything of myself with a political motive. So I wanted to renew our vows on impartiality as something that was a deliverable, plus also we needed to be very clear with audiences that that is what we were doing. The other point was I do think there are voices beyond Westminster voices, beyond politically aligned voices, where, you know, research shows that institutions, and I know this is being talked about in the political realm as well, institutions that don't uncover diverse voices, voices that frankly sometimes don't feel connected with the metropolitan areas, we need to get to them. They are paying their licence fee and they want to know that their voices are being heard. That's what the points I was making.
You did actually say in your speech about changing from the internal to the external. Is that about the point that you've just made? Effectively about this idea of the metropolitan elite and wanting to reach, in political terms, we think of that as sort of red wall constituencies. Is that what you mean in terms of connecting, not just diversity in terms of groupings of BME groupings, but actual diversity in terms of social background?
Totally. And I think one of the, I've done a lot of work on, and we'll no doubt come to it in the morning's discussion around other minority groups, protected minorities. But actually, I think one of the key vulnerabilities for institutions, if they don't have deep socio-economic diversity, and also, I think institutions, London-based institutions, no one has done more, I think, than the BBC to push ourselves out of London. Again, we can talk about that later in the morning, I'm sure. But absolutely, one of the things we want to do is we are funded by every household, and I said in my speech, across the land. It is actually critical that we aren't associated with one particular point of view or perspective on life. And there are dangers, and I don't think the BBC is unique to this, but there are dangers when institutions surround themselves with people internally. And frankly, it's straightforward. The BBC can be made very complex, but at the end of the day, we have a simple brief, which is to make sure every household that's paying the licence fee gets good value from it.
Okay. I would probably take issue with the idea of serving across the whole country. As a West Midlands MP, we get the poorest return for our licence fee. However, I know that colleagues are going to talk about regional broadcast very shortly. Is what you're saying...
Well, just, Chair, if I may, the West Midlands, the Midlands general impression of the BBC is up there at 6.7, in line or ahead.
So
it's not just hours received, it's also and I take the point, by the way. I think there are things for us to do across the country which we can talk about. But I take the point. But I think our actual base provision across the country remains pretty solid.
Yeah, £12.50 for every licence fee is the return that West Midlands gets on this. It's 5.3 million people, roughly the size of Scotland. And currently, you know, what used to be Pebble Mill is now obviously the mailbox is hollowed out. So, look, we could be all day basically talking about the West Midlands, but what I would say to you is Indeed. I think that, you know, my perception is not what you're saying there in terms of the regional, your regional delivery. Now, just moving back to the point that you just made there in terms of this sort of reaching out to different demographics, talking about the idea of being almost too internal, and the idea of basically not being talking in an echo chamber, if you like. I suppose that's what we're sort of talking about here. Is this just a simpler way of recognising the criticism that was made by the Secretary of State when he said that the BBC was too woke? Is that correct? Are you now saying, effectively, that the Secretary of State had a point?
No. I think the Secretary of State made the point around the dangers around metropolitan focus, and I recognise that issue. I really do. I think there's always a risk that institutions that are based in Hague. I mean, I've done this in my commercial career. At the end of the day, you have to be utterly focused on your paying audience. You know, I don't know. We have to use the term customer carefully here, but at the end of the day, I have to deliver as the leader of the BBC. Every house in the Midlands, every house in Birmingham has to feel the £157.50 offers excellent value. I take that challenge. That's what we're about.
Okay. Did you think that the BBC's coverage of Brexit in any way broke trust with certain parts of the UK public, particularly in the north of England, as reflected in the general election of December 2019?
Well, I suspect if we go back into deep history of various
it's not deep history. It's current. It's current right now, as we well know, as we approach the deadline for a trade deal.
If you want to talk about our current delivery, I think the research is very clear that actually we're trusted. The way we've covered the latest crisis has been, I think, exceptional in terms of the way we're covering our history. In terms of the Britain and Brexit, coming to your question, Chair, because I know I'll frustrate you if I just bring it straight to the current. I think I have been very clear that overall I am very proud of the BBC. I think its record on impartiality is exceptional. But if you read my speech, it is pretty clear that we have a much more polarised country. We have a nation that has strong views across the divide, and sometimes, in the pursuit of trying to get things, you know, getting different political perspectives, I think we did a good job in that. But there are no doubt people sometimes say, look, I would like to hear my point of view more represented by an institution like the BBC. We take that challenge.
Okay, but so just to answer the question, do you think that the BBC's coverage of Brexit in any way broke a sort of bond between the BBC and some parts of the United Kingdom?
I haven't got evidence to suggest that. I've got the overall trust scores in the BBC have held up, and overall, actually, as an institution versus other institutions, we did well in terms of maintaining our trust. I just don't want that to indicate complacency, because I think there is definitely some people who feel the BBC is too distant and their views are not represented. And that is... So I've got the data, which I could give you is somewhat comforting versus norms for other institutions, and our trust scores, Chair, have remained strong throughout this period, if you look at them. But I take the point, there is areas of the country that would like to feel their voices are more represented, and groups that would like their points of view more represented on the BBC. And I've offered that challenge. I'm not complacent on that.
Okay. You say that opinionated columnists and campaigners shouldn't be working at the BBC. You were very clear about that in your speech. Are you prepared to terminate the contracts of those who do breach the rules on impartiality, whether on social media or on air?
Well, I'm prepared to take the appropriate disciplinary action all the way to termination, yes.
Okay. So if, for example, I'm a well-known sports presenter and I tweet in a reply to the Prime Minister, where the Prime Minister states, you can only meet people who don't live with you outside, whatever the weather. and the sports presenter says, think they're hoping everyone gets pissed so they forget about their leadership or lack of. Is that an appropriate thing to be saying? Is that a disciplinary matter under your brave new world at the BBC?
Well, just to be clear about where we're at on because I think we could play, and I fear I may frustrate slightly, but if we go back and look at every historical tweet as I come into the job, what I've done, well, I'm coming to the point, which is what I want to do, and I take the point. What I want to do is we are going to be publishing in the next few weeks, and this is imminent, clear social media guidelines. And they will cover both news and current affairs and beyond news and current affairs. And we will have within those guidelines the enforcement policies will be very clear, which is we'll be able to take disciplinary action, we'll be able to take people off Twitter. I know people want to see, hard action on this.
Sorry, did you just say you'll be able to take? Sorry, excuse me, Mr. David. Did you just say you'll be able to take people off Twitter? Well,
if they want to work for the BBC, I can ask people to. I can say you would suspend their Twitter account. Absolutely.
Right. Okay. Now, just on that point, then, I noticed an interesting exchange a little while ago, not historic, between Jonathan Agnew, a broadcaster I respect a great deal, actually, and Mr. Gary Lineker. Now, in this respect, he stated, Jonathan tweeted Gary, said, "Gary, you are the face of BBC Sport. Please observe BBC editorial guidelines and keep your political views, whatever they are and whatever the subject, to yourself." Mr. Lineker in return said, "Jonathan, I'm the face of my own Twitter account. I continue to tweet what I like, and if folk disagree with me, then so be it. Thank you so much for your concern, which I imagine wouldn't be a concern at all if you agreed with me." So who is right in that instance? Is it Jonathan Agnew saying to Gary Lineker, effectively, you need to follow BBC editorial guidelines and I would be sacked, as in one rule for one rule for another, or is it Mr. Lineker?
Well, as I say, a couple of things. One is we will issue the social media guidelines, which will be clear. The second is I would note that Gary Lineker has actually been very clear in his statements recently, saying, I understand I have responsibilities when working at the BBC. Those responsibilities will be clearly laid out, and my belief is, as I say, I am now the Director General, so I'm running the show, and in my view, party political statements are not the right thing for people to be making if they are as part of an impartial news organisation. One thing I would say, by the way...
Excuse me, Mr. Davies, you just said impartial news. Do you actually mean that only if they're in news or outside news?
No, I mean, we will come back with social media guidelines to make clear where the lines are. Okay, but I think if someone is, just to be clear, Chair, if someone, just to warm to your theme, if someone is a face of the BBC, I think entering into partial politics, partial party politics, seems to me not the right place to be, and I've been very clear on that. Now, there are some complications for us to work through in terms of contractual arrangements, all the various things. But I have to say, I think the audience is less bothered by contractual status. My role as the Director General is to absolutely make sure that the BBC's impartiality is first and foremost protected. Now, the final thing I'll say is I do think there'll be... I know everyone would like me to fire anyone, or some people would like me to fire immediately there as a foot fault. I'm sure over your career and my career, sometimes we have not acted perfectly. So there'll be a range of there'll be a range of enforcements. Yeah. So sometimes someone just needs a talking to. Other times there are serious matters or there's a real problem. But the issue here...
Does it depend how big a star they are? Sorry, Mr. David, does it depend how big a star they are, whether or not they get a talking to or they get action?
No, it doesn't. I do think, for what it's worth, there's a difference between people who appear on the BBC as... an irregular contributor versus those people who are clearly faces of the BBC and regular contributors. Because what I don't want, you see, as editor-in-chief, I do want to have an organisation where you could get opinionated people, you could get polemic, but if people are the face of the BBC, see, I step back from the whole thing. Listen, in terms of my priority and what I've tried to do in terms of listening to people is say very clearly that the overriding concern here is the BBC is seen as an impartial organisation that absolutely understands and responds to the views of the British licence fee payers. It is damaging to us if we are aligned with any party political interest. And it's a very, very straightforward brief for me.
Okay, thank you.
Difficult to deliver, by the way, Chair, but it's a straightforward brief.
I can appreciate it's a tightrope. Just to briefly move on to decriminalisation and evasion.
Indeed.
Now, it does seem to be from many quarters that the government is very minded towards decriminalisation. What plans are you actually putting in place in order to cope with that? Bearing in mind, of course, that evasion has gone up to 7.2%, 1.3% above target, which is roughly £50 million, I think, to your bottom line.
Right.
So, first of all, what plans are you doing? What plans are you taking or putting in place in order to cope with that? And what do you think it is effectively? Is this the long-term efficacy of the licence fee from which you derive something like 70% of your income?
Okay. We might want to, there's quite a lot there. So I think the first thing is, I might want to just say something on decrim, then I might hand to Glyn just in terms of licence fee monies, if you want to do that now, Chair, because in terms of where we are.
Well, I'll tell you what, just cover decriminalisation at the moment, and colleagues of mine will come in on the finances later.
Perfect.
That's all right.
Quite a lot, yeah. I think with decriminalisation, the first thing is it's a bit early for us to make assumptions on exactly what the government will or won't do. I understand certain press stories and this, that, and the other are running, but the truth is we're yet to see the first consultation. The questions around the second consultation. So it's quite early days in terms of us looking at what the learnings are. I mean, the BBC's position is I think, crystal clear on this, and endorsed by the Perry report and numerous bits of analysis, which is, regardless of any broader debates about the licence fee, as it's currently configured, I think this system, logically, is hard to beat. If you're a law-abiding, paying customer and licence fee payer, what I'm trying to do is get you most value for money. And the decriminalisation proposal, frankly, in my mind, just doesn't pass the logic test. And it's not purely about ideology, it's simply about what's the most effective way in which you get money from the BBC. And the issue with the decriminalisation, as we know, some of the big statistics that are bandied around are questionable in themselves. In magistrates, time spent in magistrates' courts, 0.3%. Number of people going to prison last year, 5. And that was for, as I understand it, multiple issues around debt payment, not payment of debts. Yeah. And with
respect, Mr. David, also it's the biggest means by which that young women are criminalised in this country.
Well, I understand. And we are sensitive to that. No one wants to see anyone go to prison, or no one wants to see criminal records. But the actual numbers of themselves are low in relation to the millions and millions, 25 million, law-abiding citizens who are paying the system. Now, the issue is, I've got the sensitivities. I worry about the sensitivities. No one wants to see people going through, suffering if they have issues with regard to payment, all those things. But the issue is the alternative. The alternative, if you look at civil systems, the fines are higher, the bailiffs arrive at the door, the system just is not good. So no one's proposed a system to us that beats the current system logically. So our position as the BBC is, in the interest of law-abiding, licence fee payers, and in the interest of just efficiently collecting money with the right level of sanction. As I say, no one wants to see anyone go to prison. The numbers are remarkably low, and no one wants to see that. But actually, the current system for us is the best, and it's not just the BBC saying that. The government did the Perry report and laid it out very clearly. Yep. So that's where we are.
Just on that point, of course, obviously when the Secretary of State appeared before us, he was he was quite dismissive actually of the Perry report, which is obviously a very substantial piece of work. He said, "Oh, that's 6 years ago." So that was his approach in that respect. Just as a sort of visionary at the top of the organisation, a bit of vision for us, if you like. Do you think the increase in licence fee evasion, obviously up now to 7.2%, well over target, is that rooted in societal change in some way? And what are your sort of views in terms of what the BBC needs to do in order to basically not just reduce evasion in terms of trying to capture those who are evading, but also in the offering and what they're actually trying to achieve.
Sure. And I think there's two answers. There's two time frames on that question, if I may, Chair. One is the short. Well, what I mean by that is there's the short-term issues, and I can hand to Glyn in a minute. But there's short-term issues around COVID, all payments being. Do you see what I mean? So there's some factors that clearly impact us, and also in the short term, the actual evasion rate, if you look at it versus other countries around the world. We're in a very strong position. I mean, I think our evasion rate is low. It remains low. We're slightly behind target, but there's some things regarding COVID and other things that we can see impacting us. I don't, however, dismiss fully your challenge, if it is that, which is part of my strategy as the Director General. I've been very clear that, for those who've read my speech, it's pretty clear that I don't that I introduce jeopardy into the game, Chair. Yeah, which is. Unless we really work together, and I think we'll need support to do this, and it's a winnable battle, but we need to make sure in the world of internet-enabled kind of hyper-competition, the BBC keeps delivering value. And I think that is under pressure, and we'll need support, and I think people need to fight for the BBC, and we need to do our work as well to make sure we're relevant, we're differentiated and focused. We can talk a bit more about that later when it comes to PSB review. So I don't think we're free from external pressures. I'm not saying everything's okay, but I do think this particular period in terms of evasion, one is the overall rate is reasonable. It's a bit ahead of our target. But Glyn, I don't know whether you want to say anything in terms of just the latest.
Yeah, can I just add to that? Our licence fee collection is driven by a number of factors, including evasion, household growth, and the sort of consumer behavioural changes. In last year, we did have a slight fall off, but I think we should put that in the context of over the last 6 years, we've had increases that have gone up, and also we've had momentarily falls, but broadly collected 25 to 26 million licences. Every year.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Isherwood. We are well aware of the figures. We had a briefing from the National Audit Office on this. I mean, the fact that the simple matter is that you're 50 million under target and that evasion is increasing as a result. My point to Mr. Davey was very simple. It's basically, is this a societal change? But we sort of got a half an answer in that respect, so thank you for that. Can I ask you, Mr. Davey, directly, is it acceptable in any way that someone who's previously been convicted of non-payment of the licence fee should be appointed BBC chairman?
Well,
yes or no?
I hope throughout the morning I answer questions directly, but the one thing as the Director General I don't think I should do, and this will not surprise you, is talk about who is the right candidate.
I have no one in mind, Mr. Davey. I'm just saying, do you think it should bar an individual from the job if they have been convicted of non-payment of licence fee?
And
it's a criminal offence.
But with respect, I don't run the appointment process for my boss, and I think that's appropriate. I put my trust in the process, and I'm confident in the process, and I will let others decide who is the right person to lead the BBC. I'm not going to make judgments on whether what the right criteria are on that. I just think that's the wrong thing for me to do. I've got a job to do in terms of running the BBC. I'm going to get on with it. I need to reform it. I need support from a chair to do that. And I've worked with many great chairs in my time. I expect to work with another one based on the process.
Okay. All I'd say to that is that effectively, what you're saying there is it's not me, Gov, and it's not my responsibility, etc. So I do understand that. But surely as an organisation which is absolutely wedded in change to the licence fee, which is 70% of its revenue, to have a chairman, whoever that may be, to be convicted of non-payment of a licence fee seems to be completely beyond the pale. It's almost like being convicted of fraud and being in a bank. It's just not. Or
am I allowed to interrupt, Chairman, or not?
Yeah, of course you can, Sir David. Go on.
You've raised an issue for the Director General, and quite rightly, he has his head down running the organisation. The issue about who his new boss is not a matter for him, nor is it a matter for me. But I do have some comments on it, and I've clearly reflected on it, because it would be hard to ignore what has been going on. This announcement about, or the announcement that we're looking for a new chair, is a matter for the government, and finally it's a matter for the Prime Minister. But it's an important matter for the government, and if I may say so to you, it's an important matter for the DCMS committee, who will need to satisfy themselves in the pre-appointment hearing which you will hold, both the proper process has been followed and that the candidate has the appropriate qualities. So the question you've asked my Director General is much more one for you than for him. On the question of the process, there's of course a public appointments process which will be overseen and needs to be followed. And the Charter is absolutely clear. Article 22 of the Charter says clearly, the appointment may only be made following a fair and open competition. So due process is important. In line with this, I hope the government will encourage well-qualified candidates to apply so that there is a strong and diverse field, rather than putting them off by giving the impression that there is already a preferred candidate. On the question of qualities that you asked my DG about, and he quite rightly isn't going to be drawn, the qualities of the candidate, but he did say in his first speech, the BBC is about being free from political bias, guided by pursuit of truth, not a particular agenda. And he particularly went on to say, if you want to be an opinionated columnist, indeed you quoted this back at him a little while ago, if you want to be an opinionated columnist or a partisan campaigner on social media, that's a valid choice, but you should not be working at the BBC. But the point I want to make is that impartiality starts at the top of the organisation. It doesn't start halfway down. It starts with the chair and the board. If the candidate comes from that sort of background, he or she will need to be able to demonstrate to you that they have left their strong political views at the door. Impartiality starts at the top of the organisation.
Yeah, that's fine. We actually are writing to the Secretary of State to outline the committee's concerns over the news stories that were emerged this weekend. We decided at the private meeting earlier today, so that will be being sent to the Secretary of State in that respect, because I think you are absolutely correct in the fact that the processes need to be absolutely open, and we look forward to eventually having our hearing in terms of the confirmation of the new chair. Steve Bryan.
I'm pleased to hear it, Chairman. You clearly have a part to play in this game, as does the government, and the BBC does not. The decision on who the new Director General was, as you and I discussed last time, solely a matter for the board, but the decision on who the next chairman will be, my replacement, is, as we've just discussed, for the government and